Welcome everyone to our first virtual conversation in the Representation Matters program series, News Shift, Working Toward a More Informed Electorate. This series is hosted by the George Washington Carver Museum and Cultural Center and Arizona Humanities, the Arizona affiliate of the National Endowment for the Humanities. Since 1973, Arizona Humanities has supported public programs that promote understanding of the human experience with cultural, educational, and nonprofit organizations across Arizona. This particular program was funded by the Why It Matters Civic and Electoral Participation Initiative, administered by the Federation of State Humanities Councils and funded by the Andrew W. Mellon Foundation. Our speaker this evening is Dr. David Cuillier, Associate Professor at the University of Arizona School of Journalism, President of the National Freedom of Information Coalition, and a board member of the First Amendment Coalition of Arizona. Before we get started, I turn it over to him. For the best viewing option in this webinar, you'll want to be in full screen setting, so you can adjust that in the top right-hand corner of your screen. If you have any questions during Dr. Cuillier's talk, you can ask them in the Q&A, and you should be able to get to the Q&A function at the bottom of your screen. So that's where you'll post your questions. If you see any questions that you really want to be asked that someone else has asked, you can actually upvote those questions and those will be bumped to the top. Dr. Cuillier has kind of divided his presentation into four sections. So at each section, he'll pause and we'll take a look to see if there are any questions in the Q&A. And today's session will be recorded, and that recording is going to be made available on our website at arizonahumanities.org.
Well, thank you, Julianne, and thank you all for showing up. Boy, I'm just so glad that you're here, and I think hopefully it'll be a fun hour. And I'm looking forward to your questions. I bet you're engaged civically. So let's get started. I'm going to run through the PowerPoint and take a pause, basically 4 sections like Julianne said, and take questions because it gets boring just listening to someone drone on for 40 minutes. We'll make sure we have questions at the end too. So I'm going to get the PowerPoint started here. The topic being news shift, and we'll get going. All right, working toward an informed electorate. This is something I'm passionate about. I'm so concerned about our future as a democracy, as a country, as a society, and news plays such an important role. Let's talk about that. So we're going to talk about the state of the news industry, where it is today, the impact news has on society, the threats to an independent press, and solutions. I hate to be such a downer. I think we need to leave with some hope and optimism and practical tips for what we can do to make a difference in this world. So, we think of news, we think of the old days, we think of the old newspapers. This is a picture of exactly the kind of weekly newspaper I started working in high school in Ferndale, Washington State. It looked exactly like this. I was the boy running with the white hat. And, we all gathered around, we read the newspaper, it was a thing. Maybe we watched Walter Cronkite or Tom Brokaw or other folks all at 6 o'clock at night. Well, that's no longer the case in this country, right? About 10 years ago, I did this 45-day drive across America in a rented Chevy Impala, where I did training sessions for the public and journalists in accessing government information. And it was really interesting. This is really where I realized big change was happening. I would go from newsroom to newsroom, and what I would see was reporters just dejected, burned out, terrible. I mean, it was awful. And when I was in Georgia, I was going along this country road and I came upon this scene. And I took a picture, what the heck, a bunch of vultures going after some roadkill. And it just hit me at that point, this is what all these journalists felt that I was talking to, meeting with. This is what they thought they were. They were the roadkill, and everybody else was out to get them, was taking advantage of their demise. It was really an eye-opening experience for me. And since 2010, it hasn't gotten better. In fact, it's actually gotten worse. The 10 worst jobs in America are in the media. A bunch of them are in the media. Newspaper reporter number 3. Not a pleasant situation, especially for our students who hope to have a career in journalism. And as we've seen over the 10 years, a lot of change. The legacy media industry is crashing. Jobs down. Broadcast TV up a little up, some doing okay, digital doing well. Newspaper staffs cut in half. And we're seeing this all across the country, cut in half, completely different from what we had just 10 years ago. And you see the charts and the data where newspaper revenue is tanking, where you see news deserts emerging across the country, where you have counties that have no news outlets, no new local news, no newspapers. Those are the counties in red. The ones in yellow are one newspaper, and then blue have multiple newspapers. So we're seeing these news deserts spread across the country at a phenomenal pace every year. We're seeing the crash in newspapers from 9,000 to 6,700 in 6 years alone, and more going out of business daily. They're popping up all over the country, out of business, including in Tucson, the Tucson Citizen. Across Arizona, they're starting to die off. Communities with no local news. In fact, just a couple weeks ago, a newspaper in Missouri published this edition, an edition with no news in it. And the message was, this is our future, where you have no local news. So why has this occurred? Why are we seeing this? Well, there are a lot of reasons. It all started long ago, really in the 80s, with the breaking up of sources of information that we could watch, starting with cable, right? And then going, of course, to the internet, lots of options for people. They don't have to read the Arizona Republic or the East Valley Tribune, which used to be a viable newspaper in the Phoenix area, or the Tucson Citizen, which used to be a newspaper. They can just go to the internet now. Craigslist killed classified advertising, which was 10% of most budgets. And then corporate ownership of newspapers led to hedge funds coming in and basically buying up newspapers, squeezing what's left of them, and killing them. We're seeing that with TV as well, and radio, and all sorts through the medium. So all of these factors play into this cycle of what we've seen over the past 10 to 20 years, where really corporate owners come in, they want short-term gains, they bleed the organization, they cut the news staff in half. The product gets worse. It's much worse than it used to be even 10 years ago. And then less people read it or view it. Advertisers aren't going to go to it. They have to cut more. It's this cycle of death that we're seeing all across the country in the legacy news media. So why should we care? That's the big question. And I'm curious, does anybody have a question about this, about what I just talked about, and has seen it? Has anyone seen in their community the news media being less effective than it used to be? I'm just curious. Feel free to put in the chat or Q&A if you've seen such a thing or wondered about that. And I'm going to stop the share just to take a moment to talk about that. I'm really curious. Have people seen this or not? Or is it just me? Are they seeing a decline in news content? It's your opportunity to chime in. Samantha, oh, go ahead. Samantha's saying, I think people tweeting is news. 14 words is not news. Of course not. Steve saying, absolutely. Susan, yes, the corporate takeover. Absolutely. And I work for corporate media, Gannett. I work for a Gannett paper in Boise, Idaho. I also work for family-owned papers. So I've worked for both. And I can tell you, I'd rather work for a family-owned paper. They care about their community. So, so good comments. And you're right. When I ask students, where do they get their news from? They say Twitter or Insta whatever, or Facebook. And those don't produce news. That's not news. Karen gets online feeds from regular newspapers. Yes, you can get online feeds. That's helpful. There's some benefits to apps, that's for sure. Sitting in, night, I lie in bed and I just kind of read the news on my phone, right? Probably a lot of people do that. But definitely we notice a change. We notice a difference. So let's go on to the next thing here that I will share. Oh, Steve, also, I provided the most detailed coverage of the 2011 Arizona Independent Redistricting Commission process on my blog, Arizona Egalitarian. Not able to do that this year. Nobody is filling the void thus far. Yeah, voids, lots of voids out there. Not fun. All right, so let's talk about why we should care, the impact on society. Why does this even matter? A lot of people are like, who cares? Those jackals, the journalists, let them die. They deserve to die. They're unethical and fake news. Well, here's what we know from the research. And hopefully you'll be able to get two handouts from this talk. One is the PowerPoint slides, because some people ask for them. And I refer to studies and, sometimes that's helpful. The other file that I hope you get are readings and citations to the studies that I talk about so that you can go look them up yourself. So what I'm going to talk about is actually research-based. It's not just my opinion. This is what we know based on a bunch of research out there. And I cite the studies in the handout that you'll receive. One are the effects of all this crumbling of the legacy media. One, we know that we have less local news coverage, less political coverage, less environmental reporting, and less investigative reporting. All this has been hugely cut. So again, you think, who cares? I don't care. I go about my life. I'm fine. Well, it matters. We know, and research shows, that strong investigative reporting and the ability for people to have information reduces government corruption. That's just a fact. We know that from tons of studies. So as these newspapers and TV stations and other venues disappear, we're going to have increased corruption in our country. Big issue. We know, research shows, that this information makes our drinking water cleaner. There's actually a study that shows that. When you have a community with a strong press and strong access to information, municipalities are more likely to make cleaner water for you. We know there are cleaner restaurants. It directly affects the food you eat when you go out to eat. It directly affects our elections. We know that when newspapers disappear, there are fewer political candidates who run for office. The people are less civically engaged in their community. Newspapers are a direct contribution to that civic engagement, and TV stations. And without them, we're going to continue to lose that. Not to mention just money in our pocket. One study showed that when a newspaper went out of business in a county, the municipal bonding rates went up in the city. In other words, the city got kind of fat. It spent more money. It went into debt. The bonding company saw that and hiked up their bonding rates. So it cost taxpayers more dollars. This is why newspapers are important. Watchdogs, journalists are important. They hold government officials' feet to the fire. And if they're not there, then we have a gap. And human nature, people may, let things slide. And that costs people money. In fact, one study from an economist out of Stanford showed that for every dollar spent on public affairs reporting by journalists, society reaps $287 in benefits. That's saved lives, that's increased efficiency in government, saved taxes, you name it. It pays society to have journalism. So for every dollar we spend on journalism, we reap huge benefits. That's important, right? Just from a dollars and cents perspective. Now, of course, the other huge effect of all this, the fracturing of our media channels, has caused a fracturing in our attention and our bubbles, our filter bubbles, what we pay attention to. The days of everyone watching Walter Cronkite are over. We don't have a shared sense of society and community in this country anymore. We all look at our own little websites, our own news sources, and are able to ignore conflicting values and ideas. And as a result, this is polarizing our country. If you're conservative, you tune into Fox. If you're really liberal, you tune into MSNBC. If you're kind of wherever, you go wherever. And this is a problem. In fact, the research shows conservatives are more likely to go to Fox exclusively. Liberals, hardcore liberals, more liberal, are likely to go to MSNBC or some other partisan sites. There isn't much in the middle, to be honest. So this has effects on our society. We call it polarization, political polarization, which we've all seen graphically over the past 4 years. Back in '94, everybody kind of clustered toward the middle. For the most part, we could agree on things. You could have a Goldwater actually agree with somebody liberal in Congress, maybe get some stuff done even. That changed. 2017 we've drifted apart. And it's gotten even worse in the past 4 years. And so you can just compare the two charts and see where we've gone as a country. There are a lot of reasons for this. I'm not a political scientist, so I can only account for the media factor in this. I don't, there are other things at play here that I wouldn't presume to talk about, but I can talk about the media element, and it's pretty clear. We see it in all the research. And we see the problems this is causing in our country. We all see it at the Thanksgiving dinner table. We see it in talking with friends or family that we were once friendly with. And we see it in the polling. We see that we disagree as a country widely on key basic issues, whether it's healthcare, whether it's climate change, whether it's racial injustice. We don't agree. We're completely separated. Whether it's illegal immigration, we're separated. We don't agree. Whether it's even something as basic as a virus, we can't even agree on something like that. And this, of course, has had huge ramifications, life and death ramifications for our society, that we cannot come to some consensus, let alone agree on whether an election is legitimate or not. So, all of this is connected, and a lot of it is connected to our shared sense of reality. In this case, we don't have shared sense of reality. So can it get worse? Oh man, I'm so negative here. I hope you have a stiff drink to get you through this, because it ain't pretty, right? Well, I mean, what do you think? Do you think this is a cause? Do you think there are other causes at play? What role do you think the media sphere have in all of this, in elections, in our society? Am I wrong here? Or, are there alternative ideas? Feel free to chime in on the chat or the Q&A. I'd love to hear your thoughts.
And Dr. Cuillier, we did get a comment from Susan. I think this is about at the beginning of your talk. She says, as a former sensory teacher, the difference in brain function between holding a hard copy newspaper and a digital input should be understood. I don't know if you want to comment on that a little.
Man, Susan, you're so right. It's funny, when I was in grad school, I actually ran an experiment on this very thing. I had one group read the New York Times in print, and then another group read the same edition, the same content online. And I measured a variety of things of the after effects. And what I found was statistical significance, that the folks that read the print edition retained more knowledge, were more widely read with world and political news than the other group. The other group, of course, what do you do when you read news online? You just zero straight into what interests you. Oh, there's a story on Justin Bieber. All right, I'll go to the sports. I'll go to this, the entertainment. And you bypass all the interesting, important stories that in a print newspaper you would see vicariously as you're flipping through. Even those sports nuts who will just dive straight to the sports section, you're gonna glance and see, oh, there's the Nation World page, and there's, oh, what's this story about something in Sudan? And maybe they might actually read it. Well, that used to happen with print and the print product, and it doesn't happen with online. So again, it's we're becoming less broad-minded just because of the medium, you know. It has nothing to do with our smarts or intelligence. It's just the medium driving it. You know, you're absolutely right. Alan says, do you think the coverage watch drives those opinions, or is it the other way around? That's an amazing question, and you're absolutely right. It's symbiotic. It's, you know, circular. The Tucker Carlson goes off on something, viewers like it. He realizes what they like. He emphasizes it. And it's not just Tucker Carlson. It's Rachel Maddow. It's everybody. Everybody's money driven. The court, and you know, they're not evil. And what I mean by they is the corporate media. They're just, it's a function of the system of what we have. People are driven by what earns rewards. And in this case, it's profits and corporate profits. And to do that, you need to create content that people will watch. And that's why the darkest, some of the worst parts of humanity are driving news content. That's why 83% of TV broadcast nightly news is about mayhem, murders, crashes, floods, wrecks, all that stuff. 83%, because it drives viewership, which drives advertising. They're not evil, they're just doing what makes money. So that's the system we have. You don't see that in Europe or other places that have a different kind of media system that's driven by other motivations. And that's the system we have in the US. Samantha says, is it illiteracy? People are just not reading as much. Wow, that's a great question. Or says Brenda. Brenda, you're right. There's an apathy. Of course, Putnam's Bowling Alone book talks about the decline in civic engagement over the years. And, you know, all this is tied together. People don't read the news as much. That's just a reality. If they do, it's some link in their Facebook feed they may click on and glance at. The research shows we're reading less and less and less. Boy, what does that mean for society? You know, I wonder, some of you may have seen that movie, Idiocracy. I love that movie. And unfortunately, for a lot of us, we're kind of headed in that direction as we become dumber and dumber as a society. It's so harsh to say, and don't get me wrong, I love this country, you know, I love humanity. We have good things about us, but that's why it's important for journalists to point out when things are not going well so we can fix them and make sure we don't go off track. So yeah, good questions. I think we have more even. Holy cow. It's mostly media and the channels which media is consumed. Yeah, absolutely. Feeding people polarizing ideals. Absolutely. You know, exactly what I was saying here. Facebook and Google feed me liberal ideas. Exactly. They're driving you to repeat the same things for certain advertisers. When I go to Google, I see these same types of stories up on here. I'm like, I'm tired of reading these same types of stories. Give me something else. But then I click on it and it feeds me more. That's what they're doing. They're kind of molding us. If you've ever seen the documentary Social Dilemma, that's kind of what's happening behind the scenes. Yes, the death of print, the multiple crisis, the literacy crisis, along with lack of critical thinking. You're absolutely right. Some people blame standardized testing in our educational system, lack of civics education, emphasis on it anyway. Boy, I don't know what the main factors are in all of this, but all of that makes sense. All right, so that's pretty depressing, right? Well, let's think of let's look at some other things, shall we? All right. So next section. Oh wait, this is depressing too. Threats to an independent press. All right, just when you thought it couldn't get bad, it gets worse. All right, this is the United States of America we're talking about. This is where journalists are being shot, are beaten up, and arrested like they've never been before. Now, the Committee to Protect Journalists tracks journalists killed worldwide. And most of them are in Mexico, the Middle East, other countries like that. When you take a look at the US, we don't really have a lot of journalists killed in our country. Thank God. So silver lining, we got to look at the bright side. We're not like some countries where the press is literally under siege and killed and reporters fear for their lives daily. We do not have that in the United States. And so that's a good thing. But we are increasingly moving in that direction. And so there's this thing called the US Press Freedom Tracker. It's been around about, I don't know, 5 years. And it's not scientific. It's these folks culling what they can throughout the country to try to track all the assaults on journalists in the US. And one thing we do see is it keeps growing every year. So there are more journalists being beaten up doing their jobs. There are more journalists being arrested by police doing their jobs. This didn't happen. When I was a journalist back in the Pacific Northwest, working in a variety of newspapers, I never was afraid of getting arrested. I was handcuffed once, but released quickly. It wasn't a big deal. I was shot at a couple times, but it wasn't by police. I did not fear for my life. Nowadays, I was talking to a reporter from the Arizona Daily Star, and she said she won't cover a protest anymore. It was way too scary. Something she covered last summer, she feared for her life. It's a different world today for these journalists. Not that it's never happened in Arizona. Many of you may be aware of Don Bowles. He was an investigative reporter at the Arizona Republic, and he was covering the mafia, investigating the mafia. And he went down to his car, and there was a car bomb, blew up. He died a week later, and it was found to be connected to the mob. So, it can happen, but it is rare. Interesting thing is, it did happen in Arizona, and it did lead to basically the not creation, but amplification of an organization called Investigative Reporters and Editors, which is now the largest journalism organization in the United States. We've seen more libel suits filed against journalists to chill them, to put them in their place. We've seen more subpoenas from folks trying to get sources, try to get their notes, trying to chill them as well. They keep increasing. We see weekly newspapers throughout the country struggling. A big issue with them are public notice ads, the government legal ads, basically. A lot of newspaper weeklies rely on these to survive, and there's a movement to put those online for free and not pay newspapers to do it. Pros and cons with both. I'm not going to get into the politics, but it is a threat to weekly newspapers, whether they live or die. We're having more and more information spoon-fed to us as a public through public information officers. This is no offense to any of you who might be in public relations or a PIO officer. It serves an important purpose. It has for decades. The research, however, shows that the techniques and strategies are getting stronger in controlling the message, in controlling what the public gets. And one study that we did showed that reporters were reporting higher levels of gatekeepers sitting in on interviewers, requiring reporters to submit questions in writing, prohibiting government employees from talking, even blackballing reporters who were the least critical, the least questioning. So these tactics are on the rise across our country, and it's affecting the information we get as a public. If you look at the ability for journalists to get public records, information, government information, it's getting worse in this country. And that's what I specialize in my research and teaching. If you look even worldwide, there's a rating of freedom of information laws for all the countries. And the US ranks 72nd in the world as far as strength of freedom of information laws. 72nd, we're in the bottom half of the world now, folks. We've really dropped over the years. And you may wonder, well, who's the best? Interestingly, it's Afghanistan and Mexico. Can you believe it? They have the strongest freedom of information laws in the world. Now, just because you have a strong law doesn't mean it's followed. So you have to take that into account. But the fact is, you have to start with a good law. And we don't have a good law. And our laws are increasingly being eviscerated, and to the point where it's really difficult for journalists and citizens to just find out what their government's up to. Case in point, over the years, I've covered politics as a journalist from lots of presidents. And when Obama got into office, he said he would be the most transparent president in the country. So he promptly pledged that the first day of his office. But what we found was over his time, he got more secretive and more secretive. And the data show, compared to him to Bush Jr., that he was actually the most secretive president in modern history. It was not fun. In fact, in 2014, I was president of the Society of Professional Journalists, at that time the largest journalism organization in the country. And the journalists were so fed up with the secrecy, we wrote a strongly worded letter to the president saying, come on, you gotta be more transparent. That letter was signed by 38 journalism organizations around the country. We all banded together. We actually went to the White House, talked to him, the press secretary, and I was all over the media going on about that. I was even on Fox News, of course, Tucker Carlson, twice to talk about this issue. Of course, they haven't reached out since, but at that point they were on this issue. So I was, even afterward, we came back a year later with another letter of 50. It still didn't make a difference. So secrecy was a problem. So I was thinking to myself after Obama left office, well, is it going to get any better? So I did a study. I interviewed hundreds and surveyed hundreds of journalists and experts saying, what's happening and what's going to happen in the future? And for the most part, they all said it's going to get worse. It's going to get worse under President Trump. And what we found is it did get worse. He hid his tax returns, which no modern president had done. He stopped providing visitor logs to the White House, which Obama had done voluntarily. The statistics on FOIA compliance, Freedom of Information Act compliance, they got worse, more secretive. So there it is. It just kept getting more secretive. In fact, when you look at the research, over 30 years, you find that it's continuously gotten more secretive over all presidencies, regardless of party. This is not a political issue. The bottom line is our government is becoming more savvy and professional at controlling information. That's all there is to it. They're getting better at hiding information. And it doesn't matter who's in charge. That's just the trend that we've seen. And so, often we talk about this being the frog in the kettle. Journalists in particular had just put up with this, just say, okay, they're going to cut back. Oh, well, a little bit of this, a little bit of that. And now we've gotten to this place to where there's wholesale secret agencies, and we're about to become frog stew. All right. So what do we do about this? All right. So I've been really a negative nabob of negativity, as I guess Spiro Agnew would say, sort of. And so what do we do about this? I mean, I'm curious if anyone has seen similar issues in their own realms, their own lives, what you see in the news. Have you seen the frog in the kettle? Have you seen this change in our society? Or is it just me and the eggheads of the research? Go ahead and put in the chat or the Q&A what you think.
While people add to the chat there, Dr. Cuillier, we did get a question as you were talking from Gerald, and he wants to know, are these issues like the loss of print media and the polarization of the population, in addition to the other issues you talked about, violence against journalists, are those common in other countries too?
Really good point. One thing we're seeing worldwide, a huge growth in freedom of information worldwide. It's exploded across the globe. Most of the 120 some countries that have freedom of information laws passed them in just the past 15 years. So we're seeing this huge, progressive movement of power to citizens to know what their government's up to. And as a result, power to the press. The journalists have been emboldened worldwide. In fact, I encourage a lot of our students, look at media around the world. Go to the Tico Times in Costa Rica, work there for a while. A lot of jobs, a lot of opportunities, a lot of excitement. Of course, there are problem areas all around the world, lots of danger. So you have to be picky and choosy and figure out where you're going. But yeah, I think it really varies, but we're clear on the trends of what's happening in the United States, and they aren't good. There are some other countries not good. There are other countries that is really promising. And Susan says, the case of Julian Assange, Biden is going after him and the whistleblowers. You're absolutely right, Susan. Obama, when he was in office, he was trying to go after the journalists. Like, how dare you print this information? It would embarrass me. I'm going to go after you. And the Department of Justice actually threatened to jail journalists for republishing information that came from classified documents under the Espionage Act. They never did prosecute because they knew they wouldn't win. The law isn't on their side. Very tenuous, not to mention public opinion. President throwing journalists in jail, they just weren't ready for it. But he finally caught on quickly. Oh, I don't have to go after the journalists. I'll go after the leakers. I'll go after the government employees. That'll stop this flow of information out that embarrasses me. And it worked. So they went after the leakers, the government employees, and threw them in prison. And now some didn't want to go along with that. So Julian Assange, he's found a way to get it out there. The Panama Papers, all sorts of other leaks that are still occurring. And I'm not defending leaks, classified information. It's a controversial issue. There's a lot of factors that go into that. But we have seen the government shift its focus off getting journalists to getting their sources. And frankly, it was a smart tactic on their part. And it seems to be working to some extent. Yeah, interesting. All right, so we have 20 minutes left. So what I want to focus on are solutions. I've been so negative, and I apologize because We need some glimmers of hope in this world, in this society, and there is hope. You know, it's not all lost. So let's look at solutions. Let's look at the future. Well, when people talk about, okay, how do we save media? How do we save the information ecosystem so people are engaged and informed when they vote? They look at various things. One, they talk about just cutting costs. And that's the easy thing. And that's what corporations have done for years. Let's just lay off reporters. Frankly, that's why I went into academia. I was tired of laying off reporters. I saw the effect it had on the news. I got sick of it. I went, got my PhD. So, you know, so cuts are one factor, but I think it's a bad factor. Some newspapers have gone to twice a week publication, print. I think you will find in the next 10 years, don't hold me to it, but I suspect the Arizona Republic, the Arizona Daily Star will not be printed in the next 10 years. I think they'll all be online. I could be wrong, but papers around the country are moving to this. Once it does not pencil out as financially smart, it will go. Heck, a lot of news organizations are trying all sorts of things, like outsourcing their reporting to India or Asia, other parts of Southeast Asia. Some are using algorithms and artificial intelligence to write stories. It has not been very fruitful, but you know, people try anything to save money. Number two, boosting revenue. Well, if you got to cut costs, got to make more money. So that's why you're seeing media companies branching out into other information avenues, like the New York Times and other folks kind of experimenting with podcasting and other forms of information flow. So we'll probably see more of that. We'll see definitely, and we are seeing now, an increase in the subscription model, which is actually a return to the 1700s. That's how media got by, was subscribers. You paid 5 cents to get a leaflet. Well, we're returning to that. No longer is it a mass media that's dependent on mass advertising. Now it's really, if you're interested in political news in Arizona, you pay a hefty subscription to the Arizona Capital Times, if that's really helpful to you. Of course, the disadvantage of this is only the rich or affluent will have good information, and we're going to have more haves and have-nots when it comes to information. The knowledge gap will increase. I've seen some news organizations actually have tipping systems for stories. You write a story, you get tipped. I mean, who knows? They're going to try all sorts of things to get additional revenue. A third option is to cooperate, and we're seeing a lot more of this, not just a conglomeration of media companies, but companies banding together, working together on projects. You didn't see that before. Journalists are very competitive, but now they have to work together. You're seeing co-ops start up, you know, papers being sold to the employees, and those have generally not been successful, but people are trying things. You're seeing philanthropy as one source of this information ecosystem, whether it's millionaires buying publications, which generally doesn't work very well, whether you have foundations funding news products like Reveal. You have lots of foundations trying to help these news organizations fill the gap. Heck, you're even seeing, you know, Giving Tuesday and huge public donation campaigns for news outlets. So again, lots of options in trying. Going nonprofit is an option. In fact, the Salt Lake Tribune was a commercial newspaper business, and it switched to become a 501c3 about a year ago, I think, and it seems to be doing okay. So maybe you're going to see a lot more nonprofit major news outlets instead of for-profit. In fact, there's a couple groups, the Institute for Nonprofit News and local independent online news publishers, two nonprofit organizations dedicated to helping nonprofit and for-profit independent news outlets. An example of that would be the Arizona Center for Investigative Reporting. It's a nonprofit out of Phoenix. I think there's a nonprofit outlet online out of Phoenix. There's the Tucson Sentinel out of Tucson, started by Dylan Smith, who was a reporter at the Tucson Sentinel when he got laid off when they closed. So he started up his own nonprofit news site, and it's still going today, about 10 years later. So you're seeing this fill the gap as well, popping up. All right, so Susan puts in the chat, is public funding realistic? Well, let's look at that. This is probably one of the most controversial solutions out there. And in fact, in the organization I'm involved with, Society of Professional Journalists, we just had an email debate about this very thing. Well, let's look at it. The reality is media have been subsidized by the government for hundreds of years in this country. This is not a new topic. The government's provided lower postage rates for newspapers since almost the founding of our country. Public notice ads that our cities pay for, that's a subsidy of weekly newspapers throughout the state of Arizona. Copyright protections are a subsidy for these folks. State sales tax breaks, public access. The fact that even journalists don't have to pay copy fees for public records at the federal level. They'll get expedited review quick ahead of the line. All those are subsidies of journalism. So this isn't a new concept. This has been going on for hundreds of years. We've seen it with public access television, where this was paid for in our cable bills for decades. We see it, of course, corporate for public broadcasting. We see it locally with our local news, Arizona Public Media, and up in Phoenix with Cronkite putting on public media. Essential parts of our information ecosystem. The problem is we don't really fund it well in the US. You look worldwide, every American pays about $3 a year toward public media. $3 a year, can you imagine? Less than a mocha. Starbucks is all we contribute. And you can see other countries, the citizens put a lot more into their public media. And it shows their public media is pretty strong. For those of you who might watch the BBC, or even in Canada, the CBC, they're funded a lot better than we fund ours, but not as much as the UK. And yet the CBC is kind of a good place. For those of you Canadians may agree or disagree, I'm not sure. Our university subsidized media. Here at the University of Arizona, Arizona State, we do a lot of work sending folks out there to do journalism that helps citizens of Arizona. It's a public subsidy. We're public universities. We could think of something like AmeriCorps, and there's actually something called Report for America that's started up, that's placing people into journalism jobs around the country, so very much like AmeriCorps or Peace Corps in a way, right? So we're seeing that going on. Some people are calling for something equivalent to the National Endowment for the Humanities, where the government provides this huge fund that is divvied out in some way. Some dangers there, but maybe it can be done. One idea that I think is very intriguing would be information taxing districts. Just like when we have something in our community where the private sector cannot make a profit, so they don't fulfill that need, like mosquito control. Who's going to go around and spray for mosquitoes? Because you can't make money off it. So we all band together, we chip in our coppers to hire someone to run around and kill mosquitoes for us. That's called a taxing district, just like fire districts. We all chip in to make sure there's some fire trucks there waiting in case our house catches on fire. Library districts, same thing. So why don't we chip in and pay for an information district, a district that'll provide us news that the private sector can't or is unwilling to provide for us? That's an option if we care about it enough. And there's actually some experiments going on in New Jersey testing this out. So who knows, maybe we'll see something arise from that. In fact, Congress is actually debating this. Last summer, Ann Kirkpatrick here from Arizona proposed this legislation, on helping local news and news survive for the good of our society. Remember, every dollar spent toward helps society, $286 or whatever. So 87, something like that. So Congress is even debating helping in that realm. In fact, if you look at this polling, the public actually is kind of on board with it. The surveys show that it's bipartisan even. Democrats and Republicans can kind of sort of buy into this. Republicans less so, right? But in some ways, like these information tax districts, believe it or not, we might have some consensus there, at least more consensus than we have on some other issues. All right, so what can we do? What can we do as individuals? Of course, subscribe to your local newspaper. That's going to save it prolong it a little longer. It's not going to save it. I mean, I don't think that we're going to come back to the same kind of media we've had. Advertisers appreciate our patronage, and that's great. I think the future's in nonprofit news. I think we have to support nonprofit news outlets, national efforts to support news in the big scheme, maybe some of those public support systems I talked about. We're going to have to come up with some new systems, and we're have to fight misinformation. We saw that over the past year or two, well, 4 or 5 years really, how misinformation can mess things up in this country, whether it's Russians with their attack on our system, information system, whether it's folks in power or folks who want power. We saw how it's fairly easy to bamboozle a significant chunk of the country. So we have to be savvy informivores. We have to graze wisely. Whenever we are given a link to something on Facebook, we got to be skeptical. We have to Google the publication, the byline of the person, check the about us. What are they really about? And even then, they often lie. You look at the about us about some sketchy organizations, they make stuff up. If they're a nonprofit, check their 990 form. You can Google ProPublica 990 and then look up any nonprofit or charity in this country. Look at their officers, look who funds them. Now, this is how we really check out who's who. Of course, be wary of calls to action. That's a big, big red flag. And then there are lots of fact checkers available out there that we can check. Snopes, when your crazy uncle posts something on Facebook and you Google it on Snopes, you'll probably find it there as fake news, as something, a hoax that has been going around the internet. Interestingly, a lot of people don't know about Journalist Toolbox, and I encourage you to check that out. It's intended for journalists. It's been around, just Google Journalist Toolbox. It's been around about 30 years. A fellow by the name of Mike Riley out of Chicago is his baby, and he's done a great job with it. And there's a whole section on verification tools. You'll be amazed by the tools online that you can verify whether a picture is real or not. That picture on Bumble that is just too good to be true, well, maybe it is. It might have been stolen or taken from somewhere else. You can check a lot of this out with these verification tools that are available for you. Not just journalists, this is for everyone to be savvy and skeptical of information. All right. And of course, there are a lot of efforts out there to help building in the trust of news and quality news that people can trust. As Steve says in the chat, the problem with information districts is how would we effectively isolate those who oversee the funding from influence on content? That's the big question. There are ways of doing that. There are firewalls you can build that protect really, if you have an information taxing district, who are you? You are, right now, commercial media, they're beholden to commercial advertisers. In the case in Tucson, Jim Click Auto, that's who they're beholden to, and advertisers. If you have an information taxing district, who your board is elected by the voters, who are you beholden to? The voters. You're beholden to the people. And that might be even more of a pure system than what we have in the commercial media. Although then you get more of a populist media, perhaps, publishing stuff that'll keep the voters happy. Pros and cons. I'm not sure if there's a pure, perfect media system in this world. There isn't. I recommend we have a variety of different kinds that all together make an interesting, complex, diverse media info ecosystem. To me, that's what I'm shooting for. All right, so there is hope. There is hope. And, I would not give up on this country or the media. I think we can still make all of this awesome. So questions, thoughts, comments? We have 3 minutes, 5 minutes. What do you have to say or wonder about?
Thank you so much, Dr. Cuillier. That was a very informative talk and really entertaining as well, I think so. Do we have any last questions in the last few minutes?
And by the way, if anyone, I'm going to put in the chat my email address. If you want to engage or, have a comment or question, feel free to reach out. I'm paid by the good grace of you, the taxpayer of Arizona. So thank you. And the tuition of my fine students.
Well, I have a quick question for you if no one has a question. At the end, as a professor in the School of Journalism, you're preparing this new generation of journalists. What are you saying to them about the state of journalism, and how are you kind of talking to them about the career field that they're going into? And obviously you want to prepare them, have their eyes open as they're entering that field, but what does that kind of look like?
Well, what I tell them, and I believe this, I envy them. When I came out of journalism schools in the 80s, at the peak of our business, and I spent the whole career on the downslide. It was not fun. They're starting at the bottom. They're at the beginning of something awesome. They have a huge responsibility to make sure we have a strong media system that holds government accountable, holds institutions of power accountable, and communicates well to the public. They have a huge responsibility, and we try to instill that. If it goes away, we are short a huge chunk of what makes this government system work, the fourth estate. And so they see that. They get jobs when they graduate. Anybody who wants a job in journalism gets one. We make sure that happens. We don't pump out a ton of journalism students because we don't need more journalists, folks. We need better journalists. And so that's our focus. And they do great things. I mean, shoot, someone there working at your shop was in my class, Griffin. He was amazing. And look, he's doing great things in this. And it may not even be journalism, but it's really the same goal. It's making our society better. That's what matters.
Thank you so much. I think we will end there on those positive words. Dr. Cuillier, I think if you want to share your email address, if you can select all of the panelists and attendees, then you'll be able to share that. And
okay.
I know you want to share the slides and make those available to everyone who attended today. So I'm going to send out an email to everyone who attended today with Dr. Cuillier's slides and also a PDF with resources and references that you can look at as well. And when I end this webinar, you will be prompted to take an optional survey. The survey, I promise, is 20 seconds long. It's 4 questions, multiple choice, just about our programming. So if you have 20 seconds after this program to take that survey, that would be super appreciated. We do have some upcoming programs in the Representation Matters series. We have another program at 6 p.m. this Thursday with Dr. Karen Kuo on stereotypes and social activism of Asian Americans in the media, which should be a really interesting talk. And we have some more programs in May. So I did drop a link in the chat with our landing page for our programs, and I'll put that in here again if you want to check that out. But thank you so much, Dr. Cuillier, for speaking tonight, and thank you everyone for attending.
Thank you. Thanks for caring.